Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Chad from Chad DIY, and in today's video I'm going to teach you how to weld. So I know there's a lot of other welding videos out there. Most of them are guys that have been doing it for 30 years. They have $3,000 welders. They're running gas. Their welds are perfect. This isn't that video. This video is a DIYer like myself that's going to teach other DIYers how to weld and what their realistic expectations are. I'm using a Harbor Freight MIG welder. Was kind of more of an entry-level unit, and there's a lot more entry-level units even besides the one I have. We're going to use flux core wire, so the welds aren't going to be quite as nice as using gas, but I think we're going to have realistic expectations of what to expect when welding. All right, before we actually get started welding, we're going to go over the 5 things that you're going to need to actually get started welding. Number 1 would be welding gloves. Now, you're not going to just want your regular work gloves for welding. The stuff gets way too hot. You're going to want a good set of leather welding gloves. They're not very expensive, definitely a necessity though. All right, number 2 thing you're going to need is a welding helmet. Now, before they used to just be the flipped style that most people use because these auto darkening ones were really expensive. That's kind of changed. These are a lot more reasonably priced than they used to be. So you're going to do yourself a favor if you get the auto darkening ones. It's going to make it so much easier especially when you're learning for the first time. So I'll provide a link to all the stuff too if you're wondering what I use, but the helmet is definitely key. All right, the number 3 thing you're going to need is a grinder / cutoff wheel. Most people, I guess, would call it an angle grinder. Now, this thing is maybe the most useful tool in my shop and possibly the most dangerous. This is a two-handed tool, especially when you're first starting off. It can so easily get away from you. It's loud as can be, kind of intimidating at first, but this is kind of a necessity for not only for cutting the metal if you don't have like a chop saw or anything, but also for grinding the metal surface before you weld. Especially for beginning welding, you're going to want a clean surface, and that'll save you a lot of headaches going further. All right, the number 4 thing you're going to need, of course, is metal to weld. So we got some different thicknesses that we're going to be doing. We got some tube, some plate. Maybe not tube, square tube, I guess you would call this, and some plate, and so that's going to be essential. Now, where you pick up these supplies, you can go to the big box stores, Home Depot, some other places, but the best place is actually to go to a metal supply place. I know that can almost be kind of intimidating at first. I remember the first time I went, I was pulling a trailer behind my Corolla. Now, you know, you can imagine a guy doing that, pulling up to these places, and then they have me back in. Well, you can also imagine how good a guy is at backing up a trailer that's pulling a trailer with a Corolla. So yes, I was that guy, but it ended up being just fine. They loaded me up. They probably talked about me behind my back, I'm sure, as I left, but it wasn't too bad. And the prices are way cheaper than the big box stores, and you can get so much more metal. Like, they have everything that you could imagine. So definitely recommend if you want to go to Home Depot and get a few test pieces just to start off with. But if you're doing a big project, go to the suppliers. They know what they're doing, and they'll hook you up. All right, the 5th thing you're going to need, of course, is a welder. The welder I'm using is a Harbor Freight titanium MIG 170, I believe. It probably says on the front. Yeah, MIG 170. So this is a dual voltage welder, so you can plug it into a regular outlet or you can plug it into a 220 volt outlet, which is really nice because in my shop I have 220, so I mostly use that when I'm in my garage. But if I ever have to take it off site, if I'm welding something outside, I can run just a regular power cord to it, regular outlet. So really nice feature. It also has the ability to use gas. I've never used gas. What we're using today is flux core wire. Now, if you don't know what that means, I think it's like a shielded wire. I'm not even sure what it means, but if you're a beginner, you're probably going to use flux core because you're probably not going to start off messing with gas bottles and everything. So it's a nice way to get you into wire feeding without having to mess with gas. All right, now that we went over all the equipment we're going to need, let's start prepping some metal to do some actual welding. So I got some 11 gauge 2-inch square tubing. We're going to kind of grind the angle part, and we'll start welding. All right, we're almost ready to weld here. The one thing we do need to do is get our settings right. And what all these modern day welders have is they have a complete chart for what settings you need. Now, I'm kind of assuming you have your flux core wire all ready to go. That's just kind of inserting the spool and feeding it through the wire feed is really simple to do. Each welder might be a little different, so I probably won't go into that because that's going to be follow your instructions for your welder about your mechanism there. But for flux core, you're going to be either running a 0.030 or 0.035, I believe, are kind of the two main ones. And you want your wire to match the nozzle tip. So the tips come in two different sizes as well as the wire. And also for your settings, can zoom in here in a second, but your settings are going to be dependent on what wire you're using as well. So they have options for the 0.030 or the 0.035. So they do color code it, so it's easy to just kind of follow along to get those settings exactly how you want them. All right, we have our settings ready to go on the welder. We do need to ground the metal piece. So I have a welding table. I could ground the table, or I could ground the piece. Now with these smaller pieces, it's easier to ground the table. So I'm just going to do that. Also, I usually clamp these pieces in place too. I have woodworking clamps. I have metal magnets. You kind of use whatever you have just to kind of keep that in place, especially when you're first going to start tacking it in place. Now I go from left to right. I think that's maybe if you're left-handed, you can do the opposite. I'm not even sure. But you keep it at an angle. I usually steady it with I guess that'd be my pointer finger on my left hand and my thumb. So we're going to steady it. We're going to keep it at an angle, and then we're going to start running a bead here. All right, so we just made our first weld. I think it turned out pretty decently, I guess. Like I said, it's not going to be like the professionals do it. The equipment you use along with the gas, I think you don't have as much splatter as with the flux core, so it's hard to really duplicate some of those results that you see online as well. So I think we got a really good first start. I'll kind of have a video of kind of going through the motions of how I did that weld without actually welding. Part of the problem, it's hard to show how to weld because of the brightness of the weld when on camera, so you can't really see exactly what I'm doing, but I'll kind of roll a clip of how I'm doing it without actually welding. Now the next step I'm going to do is we're going to weld two different thicknesses of metal. So it's pretty easy kind of getting the settings when you're welding the same thickness, but it can be a little bit more tricky when you're welding two different thicknesses. What I tend to do is for the thicker piece of metal, I kind of lean into welding that a little bit more. So it's kind of hard to describe, but I'm getting that a little hotter, leaning into that piece of material a little bit more than the thinner material, and then you usually have good success with that. All right, so now I have my second test. We got two different thicknesses. The bottom plate is probably twice as thick as this square tubing, so we're gonna try to weld that. Another little tip when I began welding, I got this, it's nozzle gel, and my understanding is so you dip the tip. You dip the tip in there, and it's supposed to, my understanding was not to have your weld stick right away. For beginners, a lot of times, once they start welding, they'll kind of get stuck to the metal, and then, I don't know, they kind of freak out or whatever. So that was supposed to alleviate that. I'm not even sure if it really works. It might be like the placebo effect, where I thought it kind of worked, but I think this is relatively inexpensive. I bought this many years ago, and I still have like all the jar left. So, quick little tip that you might want to try if you're having some issues with the tip sticking when you're first starting to weld. All right, I think it was another successful weld. I'll kind of show you without actually welding kind of the technique of that, but basically I'm spending probably twice as much time welding into the thicker plate as I am the thinner plate. If you even it out, it's gonna just kind of tear a hole through the thinner stuff as you're welding this thicker stuff too. So that's kind of how I go about welding the two different materials. All right, and for our final welding example, I'm going to do what is kind of welding a gap together. Now this to me is kind of the hardest type of welding because you can't just go off standard settings on your welder. You kind of have to fine tune it, and you kind of have to bridge the gap between the two pieces of metal. Welding when the metal is nice and tight and everything's ground nicely is pretty easy to do. But you're not always going to have those situations where it's like that. Sometimes you're not going to be able to grind at first, and sometimes you're going to have these larger gaps. So we're going to kind of set up these test pieces for that, and we'll see how it goes. So obviously you could tell that weld did not turn out that great. Now what I normally do in these situations is I grind it down and I re-weld it, and if I have to do it a third time, that's what I do. So it's very difficult, at least for me, to have a nice weld when you have that big a gap. So it's just kind of the reality of dealing with that situation. But welding is very forgiving. If you screw up, grind her down and try it again. All right, there you go. Hopefully that takes some of the mystery out of starting to weld. I know it can be a little intimidating if you've never done it before, but hopefully this video will inspire you to get out there and try it yourself. So if you have any questions about this video, about welding, I'll be happy to respond to them in the comment section below, and we'll see you on the next one.